When things aren't black and white, your ways are higher, your ways are higher than all of my ways. Far beyond what I can see, you're higher, your ways are higher, for now and always. Far beyond what I can see, you're higher.
I lived hard on the wire, hand in the fire for so long. But you show me better, a new kind of love. It's ever the one I want. I left it higher, higher. There's nothing that I'd rather do. A sweet elevation, our praises. There's no one I love more than you. I never knew a love like this before. The kind of life that I could not find on my own. I've seen the world, but I have never been so sure that I want your heart. God, I just wanna be with you. Be with you. Be with you. God, I just wanna be where you are. Where you are. I just wanna be where you are. Where you are. I just wanna be where you are. Your love, like nothing I've seen. My wildest of dreams don't come close. I've never known better than living like this. I cannot resist. You are. I'm lifting higher, higher. There's nothing that I'd rather do. A sweet elevation, our praises. There's no one I love more than you. I never knew a love like this before. The kind of life that I cannot find on my own. I've seen the world, but I have never been so sure God, I just wanna be where you are. Where you are. I just wanna be where you are. Where you are. I just wanna be where you. Be where you. Be where you. I never knew a love like this before. The kind of life that I can
Let's worship Jesus today.
I was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was my tomb till I met you. I was breathing but not alive. All my failures I tried to hide. It was my tomb till I met you. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. Now your mercy has saved my soul. Now your freedom is all that I know. The old made new, Jesus, when I met you, you called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day.
Sing, I needed rescue.
I needed rescue, my sin was heavy, but chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter, I was an orphan, now you call me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing, now your love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are open when you call my name. I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious
Yes, what a glorious day, isn't it? We just want to say welcome to 3D Church online and at home or wherever you are. And wherever you are, not just physically in a room, but what community you're from, state you're from, country you're from, will you go ahead and just tell us in the chat room? We just want to say welcome. We want to know who's engaging with us here this weekend. And by the way, if you're with us maybe for the first or even the second time, would you go ahead and fill out your connection card and give us your name, your email, and your snail mail address? We're going to mail you a Starbucks gift card. That's just our way of saying thank you so much for joining us at 3D Church this weekend. Such an honor to have you with us. And on that note, you can even invite some of your friends to join us right now. There's an invite button there that you can push, and maybe you know the service times. And speaking of times, we want you to know kids are priority. So after this service, there will be an online. We want to encourage you to look into and get connected with a life group in this season. I'll talk a little bit about that briefly in my message here to you, and so we invite you to be a part of that. And one more thing before we jump back into our worship time, because we want to continue to worship with one of the most beautiful songs many of you are familiar with. If you're not, you're going to quickly grow to like it. And just so you know, would you just join us right now and continue to worship together, celebrating this wonderful God that we have the privilege of being in relationship with, who will never leave us no matter what season we're in, and His Spirit will take us places we never dreamed we could go without Him. So let's worship.
You call me out upon the waters, the great unknown, where feet may fail.
Well, hey, everyone, one more time, welcome to 3D Church. Thank you so much for joining us. You may not have been with us earlier when I invited you to go ahead and acknowledge where you're joining us from, meaning whatever community, state, region, country you're from. Would you go ahead and put that in the chat room? We want to invite you to not just watch this service, but to actually engage with us. That said, and speaking of engagement, we still are in the middle of our social distancing and lockdown and quarantine at various levels across the country and in different parts of the world. And I don't know if any of you have been exposed to someone who actually has been contagious with the coronavirus. What we do know is it's highly contagious, and some of us may have been exposed to someone and may never know. But the truth is, how many of you would agree with this? We are all carriers. The question that begs to be asked is, what are we carrying? I posted this on social media just a few weeks ago. Here it is for you again. Also highly contagious is kindness, patience, love, enthusiasm, and a positive attitude. Don't wait to catch it from others. Be the carrier. Great advice, isn't it, to be a carrier of those type of things? One other thing that I have acknowledged that's also highly contagious, and it's not so much a favorable thing, but it's what I would call discouragement. Now, let me ask, how many of you, just in the last 6-7 weeks, have encountered discouragement? The truth is, it's highly contagious, and at some point, all of us carry it. Put it on a continuum. There are varying degrees of discouragement, but at some point, we're all going to be discouraged by something as a result of just journeying through life. It's normal. Not only is it highly contagious, here's the thing I want to point out today. It's also incredibly curable. It is curable, friends, and that's where we're going today as we continue our series, New Rhythms for a New Reality, dealing with, and could I even add, defeating discouragement. We're going to look at this from one of my favorite Old Testament books. It's the story of Nehemiah, and it's a leadership lesson extraordinaire. But within that, we also see their encounters with discouragement in the journey of carrying out the assignment that had been entrusted to him. So we're going to look at and identify the causes and the cures, but let's dive in and begin with the causes. And we do this in Nehemiah chapter 4, beginning of verse 6. So we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height. That's a significant phrase. For the people worked with all their heart. In other words, they were passionate, they were enthusiastic, they were engaged. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. Also, our enemies said, before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them, and we will kill them and put an end to their work. So here's the story. Nehemiah, tapped on the shoulder by God, with the assignment of rebuilding the walls that were around the city of Jerusalem, and rebuilding the temple, which was in disrepair and decimated, actually. And morale among the people of Jerusalem was low because they had no protection, right? And so that's the assignment. And he had led some Jews back to Jerusalem to rebuild these walls. And we find here in this passage, I identified 4 causes for discouragement from what we just read. And I'm going to go through these a little bit quickly, but stay with me. Number 1, fatigue. Fatigue. In chapter 4, verse 10, it says, the strength of the laborers is giving out. So the first cause of discouragement that we see here in their journey is that of fatigue. They had worked long hours, and they were physically exhausted. They were tired. They were weary. They were worn down. And can I just throw in here right now a very clear point of observation? Would you agree with me? When we're physically worn down, it's tough to be mentally, emotionally, and spiritually up. You cannot divorce our physical existence from our emotional, mental, and spiritual existence. It all works together. Vince Lombardi, this is for my friends back in the Midwest. Here you go. Great, great coach. He said this, fatigue makes cowards of us all. Fatigue makes cowards of all of us. And so when does fatigue and discouragement usually set in? Well, it tells us here. And you test this and tell me if you don't think it's true as well. But in verse 6, it says, so we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached what? Half its height. Discouragement usually comes and it peaks at the midpoint in a project, an assignment, in something we're in the middle of. In the midst of a pandemic, we're sort of there, right? There's promises of phasing out some of the restrictions, but we're still living with it. We're still on lockdown, quarantine, and we're saying, I'm just discouraged right now. And everybody, would you agree, has energy when you start. At first, it was like, oh, this could be exciting. We could get something out of this or benefit. And what I found for most of our people, and most of you, is you don't have all this free time that people were promising. You're probably working more hours than ever. You're on Zoom calls all day long, especially some of you in leadership and leading teams. And I'll come back to that and the impact of that. But once the newness of a project wears off, you get tired, and then discouragement sets in. I'll never forget climbing my first 14er. Here in Colorado, there are 50-plus mountain peaks that exceed 14,000 feet, and some have made it somewhat of a bucket list objective to climb all of them. I am not on that list, just so you know, because after I climbed my first one, and I was about halfway up, I looked down to the bottom, and I looked down, and I thought, I was way down there because I could barely see my vehicle, and the people looked like ants coming up. And I was thinking, okay, we're probably at least a part of the way, at least halfway there. That's what the sign said. And then I looked up to see how far I had to go yet. And I remember thinking to myself, you know what? I'm not so sure that God wants me to get to the top. Maybe you're in the middle of something right now. Maybe you're in the middle of this pandemic and you're feeling that way, and discouragement is setting in because you are at the midway point. Speaking of midway, or maybe we could call it midlife. Midlife is a time of life when everything starts to wear out, fall out, and spread out. Okay, maybe too much on that. You got your own visual. Midlife is when you've given up all your bad habits and you still don't feel good. Or I'll give you one more because we could overdo this. Midlife is when your wife tells you to pull in your stomach and you already have. Okay, I hope that was funny and not just a dad joke. Discouragement, let's get back to the point, suffice it to say, hit the wall builders when they were half done. Second is frustration. In verse 10, it says, and there was so much rubble. They're talking about all the trash and the debris that obviously collected as a result of any building project. If you've ever been in the middle of a building project, you know that there's going to be rubble and debris. That's just what it is. There's going to be trash laying around. Whenever you're in a building project, that's just the way it is. And these people are rebuilding the wall, and there was all kinds of trash around. And it gets frustrating. Why? Because you have to walk over and work around all the rubble. It just seems to pile up and add to the workload. How many of you have ever had to live in a house, think about it, that you were remodeling and you were still living it while being remodeled, and you didn't have doors on some pretty important rooms? You know what I'm saying? That can be a challenge. And many of you are right now working from home, and on top of that, you're homeschooling your kids, and there's more rubble than usual. It seems like you never quite get ahead of the game and your work is never done. I don't know how you're wired. Everybody's wired differently. I'm wired in such a way that physical rubble, a mess physically in my environment, directly impacts me emotionally and mentally. In other words, my mind is already full. My mind is always going, and my emotions are engaged in that. And so I function best in a clean room, a clean environment. Of course, unless it's my desk where I do have stacks and I know exactly where everything is. But you know what I'm talking about. I function better in a clean room because my mind is already full. I don't need physical clutter to add to the load of what I'm doing. Maybe you can relate to that. Third is failure. In verse 10, it also says we cannot rebuild the wall. They had succumbed to a level of defeat. And when you fall behind and don't reach your objectives, you start to feel defeated, don't you? You lose heart and you get discouraged. That's just part of humanity. And just about the time you're catching up, what happens? Another Zoom call is scheduled. Another email comes through requesting your time or your energy, or there's something else that goes on, or another disruption. Your kids are there needing help with their schooling, and you feel like you'll never quite reach the finish line at the end of the day, or by the time you're supposed to check out, or by the end of the week, get the project done. Speaking of finish line, this just came up on social media, a little meme. Finland, here it says this just in, Finland has closed its borders. Unfortunately, no one will be crossing The finish line. Did you get it? Okay. All right. Number 4, fear. Fear. Verse 12. Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. Put it in context, okay? There were some enemies who did not want these walls to be rebuilt. And so as a result, they were doing everything they could to oppose them, to discourage them, and prevent it from happening. And they used fear. How many of you know fear is a great instrument to try and use to motivate somebody? And how many of you can relate to that? I mean, think about it. I don't think the coronavirus is near as contagious and damaging as what fear and anxiety are in our culture and in our world today. And so we have to be careful, because the fact is, if you're around negative, critical people and you constantly listen to all the negative news and complaining, you're going to be infected, because negativity is contagious. Discouragement is contagious. You're saying, what should I do? We're talking about developing new rhythms for a new reality. I'm just saying, get the news that you need to get, but turn that stuff off and turn on some good news and turn on some worship music and fill your house and the airways and the atmosphere with praise, because there's good news in the midst of all that's going on, and we have to be intentional about accessing that. So how do you know if fear is the cause of discouragement in your life? How do you differentiate between these 4? Well, if it's discouragement, you have this intense desire to actually run. You just want to escape your current set of circumstances. I asked earlier in this pandemic, are you resisting, even resenting this whole season? Are you embracing it? If you're having an overwhelming desire to just run and escape it and, quote, go back to normal, parenthetical thought inserted here, I don't think normal will ever be what it once was. The whole world is changing. There will be a lot of different things that will not look like they once did. But my whole point in all of this is simply this. You just want to run. You want to get away. You can't handle it anymore. In other words, the feeling is, I've got to get out of this place. I got to quit this job. It's just too much. I want to quit the marriage. Unfortunately, many have come to that place because they're forced to live with what's always been there, but they could cover it up. Don't confuse, listen to me very closely now, don't confuse discouragement with depression. They are not one and the same. In fact, next week, we will take a deep dive into the world of mental health and depression. And I'm going to be joined in the service through the message by my really good friend and amazing communicator, Chad Brugman. I'm telling you, the guy is a long ball hitter. He is so filled with God's wisdom and God's Spirit, and he's had his own journey and story that we're going to engage in an interview process and bring some really, I think, helpful truth to all of us as we navigate this season of life, or even before this season. And so we'll talk about that next week. Let me get back to the whole idea of discouragement. If you're discouraged, it's inevitably brought on by one of those 4 issues. However, let me just say, once you identify the cause, you're ready for the cure, and you're ready to just push forward. That's what Nehemiah did. Look at what it says in chapter 6, verse 9. Notice we skipped a couple chapters here, but he says in chapter 6, verse 9, they were just trying to intimidate us, so they saw through their motives and what their agenda was, imagining that they could discourage us. There's that word, imagining that they could discourage us. How many of you know we don't have to be discouraged off the wall? But they thought they could discourage us and stop the work. Listen to what Nehemiah said. So I continued the work with even greater determination. At some point, you got to get some iron in your soul, some backbone, and say, come whatever, I'm going to finish the task of what God's put in front of me to do. And that's where Nehemiah came to. And with that resolve that he had as a leader, he then pushed through and began to encourage and motivate his troops. And they got to the cures of the causes of discouragement. What are they? Well, let's dive in. Number 1, you have to rest your body and your soul. You know, I heard this years ago, and I think it's really true. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is just get a good night's sleep. Boom. Good night's sleep. Rest your body. the first thing Nehemiah did is he gave his workers a little rest so that they could continue the journey. And if you read the whole chapter, you'll see that Nehemiah actually reclaimed some holidays that had been pushed off the calendar. And do any of you know a guy by the name of Frederick W. Taylor? In 1898, he actually did a scientific study in the workplace, the marketplace, that proved that people produce more if they have periodic breaks. Thus, what entered the workplace was the coffee break, right? So if you enjoy coffee breaks, not just coffee, you can thank Frederick W. Taylor for that. Here's what I want to say. You're saying, Keith, what's the relevance here? If you're working at home, and many of you, if not most of you are, you have to build into your daily routine some periodic breaks, new rhythms for a new reality. Build in some breaks. Take a break. Whatever you would do at the office, take that 10 minutes. Walk out of the room, go outside and walk. I know some of you are working at home and you're walking to take your calls because you're able to get outside. The sun is shining. It's brighter out there than it is contained in a space where there's noise and kids. Now, on the soul side of giving your soul some rest, this week's podcast that is available and going to all of our life groups for this week's study, we specifically address the issue of soul care. Jesus promised us a rest for our souls. How many of you know that sometimes it's not a good night's sleep that we need or physical rest? We need a rest for our souls, our mind, will, and emotions. So that's number one. We need to rest our body and our soul. Number two, reorganize your life. This is a season where we have to reorganize some things. We're forced to, right? That's why we're talking about new rhythms for a new reality so we can experience the abundant life that God came to give us. Chapter 4, Nehemiah 4:13. Therefore, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. See, Nehemiah took charge as he recognized that discouragement was beginning to set in. And as a discerning, wise, competent leader, he recognized that. And he had the people get together as families. In other words, they got together in small groups. He didn't give up, listen to me, on the mission. He just reorganized. Here's the point. Listen to me. When you are discouraged, it doesn't mean that you're doing the wrong thing. It could simply mean that you're doing the right thing in the wrong way. And God doesn't want you to quit. He wants you to reorganize, restructure, develop some new rhythms. See, God doesn't want us to give up. He wants us to reorganize. In other words, try a different approach. Some of us simply need to reorganize or rearrange our priorities. That's what we're getting out of this season, right? We've seen that maybe some of our priorities have been off a little bit. So make sure you have time for what matters most. A couple of our key leaders asked me early in this journey, said, Keith, I'm being bombarded by emails from anybody I've ever worked with, and everybody has input of how to manage this season. And I just said, well, narrow it down, narrow your focus, stay central. And within that, I also said, you know what? The thing that we need to recognize is that some of them are saying the same thing, but we can take in too many voices and we're doing too many things. And the question, here's a good question to ask. Will this matter 100 years from now? So make time for what matters most. Your faith, your God time, your family, you got that. Your friends, you can stay connected even in the midst of social separation. Stay emotionally and relationally connected. And that's where small groups come in to our scenario as churches. Why? Because we need each other. That's why Nehemiah organized them by families. They need each other. That's where we're at. And that's why we as a church have always promoted small groups, life groups we call them. Why? Because we need each other. We are created for life together. I shared in our midweek update, and I want to share it again, a highlight for me this week was when there was a celebration that was organized in less than 24 hours for a drive-by birthday party celebration for one of our granddaughters. And as all these cars collected and gathered while we were waiting to drive by and honk horns and wave and say happy birthday, people were in their cars, keeping their appropriate distance. But man, you should have seen faces that were lit up like Christmas trees. People literally hadn't seen each other face to face. I mean, in physical proximity to each other other than through a Zoom screen. And all of a sudden, it was just like the longing for people to get together. Listen to me, friends. If the jury was still out regarding the issue of isolation and community and connection, it's no longer out. A global study has just happened over the last 6 to 8 weeks, clearly communicating we need one another. If you are not yet connected in a life group, I'm inviting you right now to get connected to one of our life groups. Please, this week, you can check out online and see the different groups. You can go to the 3D Church app and see what's there. We're launching new groups here in the next couple of weeks because we anticipate an influx of new people. Listen to me, in this digital age, even if you're states away, we invite you to connect with one of our life groups. We have so many of you watching from the Midwest, Illinois, Wisconsin. I just want to say, you can connect with us right now. If this is a season and this is a place that you're finding encouragement and nourishment for your soul, connect with us, please. Let me just conclude and say people in isolation are easily going to be discouraged. And that's one of the things, quite frankly, that concerns me the most about this season, because we don't know when we're going to be able to physically gather as we did before this pandemic. It's going to be a while. We do know that, and it's probably going to be at a graduated pace. And so until then, I just want to do everything I can to let you know we love you, we're here for you, we care for you, and we want you to be connected. Not just relationally, but spiritually, and that's what our life groups are all about. Finally, number 3, and I wrap it up with this. Remember the Lord. Look at what it says in Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 14. I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Why? Remember the Lord who is great and awesome. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome. In other words, recommit yourself to spending time with Jesus, getting to know him better, and looking to him for your strength. And so I want to shift now from this story in Nehemiah to another one that I think sets the table for a song that's become a favorite of people literally around the world called Waymaker. And you're going to understand the spirit behind that revelation of who God is in that song when you hear this story. We're going into Psalms chapter 77 in particular, and there's this guy named Asaph. He was also a writer of the Psalms, not just David, and he's in a season of extreme discouragement in his life, and apparently he senses that God is being unresponsive. Any of you feel that way right now? You feel like God's just not hearing you, he's not responding? Listen to what Asaph said in Psalm 77, 1 through 4. I cry out to God without holding back. Oh, that God would listen to me. When I was in deep trouble, I searched for the Lord. All night long, I pray with hands lifted toward heaven, pleading, there can be no joy for me until he acts. I think of God and I moan, overwhelmed with longing for his help. You don't let me sleep. I am too distressed even to pray. Wow. Have you been there? Maybe you've been there in the last few weeks. So distressed, so discouraged, you don't even feel like you can pray. And I want to coach you through that right now, because Asaph doesn't tell us what was at the root of his discouragement. It might have been a terrible loss in his life, a close friend, a life-threatening illness, the breakdown of a relationship, a business failure, a financial setback. We don't know. Any of those things are possible in the midst of this pandemic. What we do know is that he's so discouraged that he can't sleep, and he cries out to God, and he doesn't sense that God is doing anything, that he's not listening, and it caused him to ask some pretty sobering questions about God. Verses 7 through 9. Will the Lord reject forever? Will he never show his favor again? Maybe you're feeling that way. Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Has his promise failure for all time? Has God forgotten to be merciful? Has he in anger withheld his compassion? Wow. Talk about a negative, discouraging outlook. He's like got God over here where he's not even engaged anymore. I want to say something that is going to surprise some of you. Prayer is not the first thing that you should do when you're discouraged. You're saying, wait, Keith, what are you trying to say here? What should you do before you pray? Look at verse 11 and 12 for Asaph. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. This is a continuation. You can read this on your own. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago. I will meditate on all your works and consider all your mighty deeds. What's Asaph doing here? He's reflecting, listen to me, friends, on who God is by remembering what God has done. See, what God does reveals who he is. It reveals his nature. And so here's my point. Before you pray, make sure you have a clear picture and an accurate picture of who God is. So Asaph remembers another time in Israel's history when it seemed that God was doing nothing. So after crossing the Red Sea, the children of Israel, who had spent 400 years in Egyptian slavery, wandered around the desert in a journey to the promised land that should have taken literally about a month or 40 days, but it took them 40 years for a number of reasons. One was their discouragement and thus their disobedience. Finally, after 40 years, the big moment's here, right? And get a picture of this. Get a picture of this. There's over 1 million people. That's a lot of people, friends. It's sort of like Woodstock, but they're all sober. I'm assuming that, okay? And they're out in the desert, and the only thing standing between them and the promised land is this thing called the Jordan River. The Jordan River. No problem, right? Just cross the Jordan. One minor detail. The Jordan is now at flood stage. Listen, we picked this same story up in Joshua chapter 3, verses 15 and 16. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest, yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam, while the water flowing down to the Salt Sea was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. Notice what happened. All right, let me break it down. The water stopped flowing upstream a great distance away near a town called Adam. Scholars estimate that the town of Adam was 19 miles upstream from Jericho, where the Israelites started. And so it's from where they could see. In other words, 19 miles. We can't even see a mile, even with a good rifle and scope on it. 19 miles, there's no way. And so here's the point. God performed the miracle upstream, far out of their sight. Waymaker, you bet. He is working even when we can't see it. God is working in our lives right now, friends. Here's the point. When you're discouraged and you wonder, where is God? Remember this. You need to reflect on who God is. And God reveals who he is by what he does. He is the God who is at work upstream. He's already gone before us. He wasn't surprised by this pandemic. He wasn't surprised by nations choosing to put people on lockdown, suffocating the economy, killing certain things, small businesses, different things that are going on. God has not been surprised by any of that. I'm telling you, friends, even though you can't see it, God is at work upstream. He's doing something far out of your sight and line of sight, but he's doing something, and there's going to come a point where you're going to look back on this day and say, oh, now I see it. God was working upstream all along. And so even though we can't see it, he's at work upstream. And so here's what I want to say. You've heard this before, but don't tell God how big your problem or your storm is. Tell your storm or your problem how big God is. Speak to that storm. Speak to that circumstance. Speak to that discouragement by remembering who God is. Let me give you one more verse, and then we'll pray and have our response time. Deuteronomy chapter 31 and verse 8. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Listen to what he says. Because God is with you. This is from the New International Version. This isn't a paraphrase, literal translation of Scripture. Do not be afraid and do not be discouraged. How do we defeat discouragement? By giving our body and our soul rest is certainly number one. Number two is reorganizing some things because priorities were out of whack. And finally, and most importantly, by remembering the Lord, the God who is at work upstream. You know, all this hit, whatever it's been now, almost 2 months ago, and I'll never forget, even before this, our oldest daughter and son-in-law and their family were graced, our whole family, with another new baby and then a job where she's able to work from home. And there were so many things where she's able to look back on it now and see that God was at work upstream, already putting things in place to take care of their family before this pandemic ever hit. I'm here to tell you, you may feel like that's not quite your story, but God has already been at work upstream on your behalf. He's already working for you to set things up on the other side. And that's what we need to focus on. And so here's the point. Deliberately acknowledge his presence here right now, right there in your living room, in your bedroom, in your kitchen, in your man cave, your car, wherever you are. God is there with you. Acknowledge that he's at work even when we can't see it. We're going to sing that here in just a couple of minutes. He is at work even when we can't see it. He really is the miracle worker, the promise keeper, right? Ask him to make himself real to you. Ask him to take control of your life right now. If you've never done that before, you've wandered from the faith, today is a day to reconnect and recommit yourself to Christ and his promises for your future. Claim them. Ask him to fill you with his Spirit and to live big through you in this season. Will you join me in prayer right now? I want to invite you. Let's pray together. Wherever you are, just you don't even have to, fold your hands. I don't go with that kind of stuff, but if you want to close your eyes, maybe you're right there even with family. You're saying, I don't even want to see him, but tears are starting to come to your eyes because you're feeling so close to God. His presence is there. He's close to the brokenhearted. He knows what you're dealing with. Will you join me? Let's pray together. Father, thank you for your presence here wherever we are. Just like we read from Scripture, you will never leave us. You'll never forsake us. We'll never go anywhere without you because you go before us. You've already entered our future. You're already into next week. And so we're not trying to bring you into next week. You're trying to get us into next week. And so right now, Father, I acknowledge that I've been doing some things, going my own way. I need to reorganize my life. I need to rearrange and realign my priorities. And my first choice is declare that you really are number one. Jesus, the best I know how. Right now, I surrender my life to you. I recommit my life to you. I give my life to you. And I thank you for your forgiveness. I receive forgiveness. I receive grace. I receive new life. And I receive a clean slate and a fresh start right now in the midst of the mess, the rubble, the pandemic, the frustration, the discouragement. And I ask you to lift it off of me. Father, right now I pray for anybody that's under a spirit of discouragement. I believe there is a spirit there. And I command its influence to be broken off of people right now. In Jesus' name, I command its influence to be broken off. Give them grace to take captive every thought and bring it into obedience to Christ. To put off the old man, to put on the new man, to be made new in the attitude of their minds, and to see you as the God who is at work upstream. You really are the way maker and the miracle worker, the promise keeper, the light in the darkness. And so, Father, now we set our hearts in the direction of worshiping you. As the worship team leads us in that song, will you respond with me today in a posture of surrender and embracing the goodness of God? And if you just prayed that prayer and are committing your life to Christ, or maybe it's renewing your commitment to Christ, you'll see there's a little place that comes up. If you're making that decision, there's a button that says raise your hand today. If you touch that button, then you're raising your hand, indicating a commitment or a recommitment to Christ, and then an opportunity for you to fill out some information so we can pray for you this week and send you an email just acknowledging your decision. If there's a prayer need that you have, avail yourself to that. On our connection card, you can go to that right now. And if there's something you're trusting God to break through in this season, maybe you would just even put in the chat room right now, I declare that I serve the way maker. Would you put that in the chat room right now? In the comments, just put it in there and say, I thank God. What is he to you today? Put it in the chat room. Put it in the comments. Is he a way maker? Is he a miracle worker? Is he a promise keeper? Is he a light in the darkness? Put that in there and declare, because when you declare who he is, he'll become that for you. Think about it, friends. He is a good Father. He's for us and not against us. And in this time of response, we're also going to give you an opportunity to receive communion. So I would encourage you to go ahead and move in that direction. And also an offering. Somebody that just new to 3D 2 weeks ago sent me a text right at the end of the message last week and said, does the church need help financially? And I responded back and I said, number one, thank you for asking. I appreciate your question. And number two, I said, by God's grace, we're in a healthy place right now financially. And we really are. And so that is kudos to all of you that continue to honor God and return him tithe and give offerings. And some of you have given above and beyond that to help out people in need. And then here's what I said to this family. I said, so we don't need your money, but God doesn't need your money. He wants what it represents, and that's your heart. So I said, first that, and if you and your family feel prompted to begin to return to God the tithe and give offerings, it'll enable us to do more. But I said, here's what I want you to hear. We don't want something from you. We want something for you. I can look you right in the eye through this camera and tell you, we don't, quote, need your money. You need to honor God. And as you do, God will take care of you. It says in Malachi, bind the devourer, pour out a blessing you can't contain. Could binding the devourer mean keeping your family from getting sick, keeping you from losing your job, keeping your small business going, provision coming through? Let's just trust God together. And let me pray for God's blessing on your finances. Father, I thank you that you really are the God who is at work upstream. For those who are in between jobs, I'm asking you to lead into a place of a new job that you already prepared for them. And they'll look back on this season and say, oh my goodness, that job was better than the one I had before. For others, secure their employment. And as we return to you the tithe and give offerings, would you fulfill your promise, God, right now, and bind the devourer and pour out a blessing we can't contain. And now as we come to the table and celebrate you as the way maker, the light in the darkness, Jesus, we want to say thank you for the sacrifice you made at the cross. And that we do this now in remembrance of you. We take and we eat of this bread and we drink of this cup. And we say, thank you, Jesus, for your goodness. Let's worship the Waymaker together.
that you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop. Come on, even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 Oh, that is who you are. 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 You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. God, we thank you that you are a miracle worker. You are a way maker. So God, today we choose to trust in you, knowing that you are the God that works up strength.